Welcome to Learn to Live Stress-Free. This is Christine Wright with Dr. Robert Wright Jr., your go-to wellness coaches of StressFreeNow.info. Our featured guest today is Lee Weber, who will speak with us about the need for worldwide addiction recovery services. Lee is the editor-in-chief of Addiction Blog, and she has made it her mission to inform others about addiction treatments and its options. As a woman in long-term recovery from addiction, Lee is interested in alternative treatments that work and help people get to the root cause of addiction, psycho-emotional issues. This passion translates from real life to online media, where Lee combines communications, content creation, and community development to assist and provide hope to others in need of recovery. You can get in touch with her at lee@addictionblog.org. Audience, welcome. Lee, thank you so much for being with us again today. We're thrilled to have you.
Hi, nice to talk with you.
Great, Lee. We are so much pleased and thrilled, actually, to have you back again. And audience, you're in for a real treat. We've got Lee Weber on the line. And so, Lee, to start off with our broadcast today, can you share your personal story of recovery and the origins of Addiction Blog with our audience? I know some people may have heard it before, but others, this would be a first time. So please start us off by sharing in that way.
Sure. Yeah. I'm what you would call a high-functioning addict. So as I was smoking weed during most of my waking hours and then drinking beer when I couldn't get high, I was able to continue to operate on the outside, but I was really hurting myself on the inside. So my drugs of choice are alcohol and marijuana, but marijuana I think is really tricky because most people who smoke weed, they downplay its dark side, right? But I think it can lead to real depression. It certainly suppresses the immune system. I kept getting these cold sores, which I think were the result of just always constantly smoking. And then, of course, I had trouble in relationship. So for myself, there were three main issues that led me to drugs. The first is my perfectionism. I'm a perfectionist. I cannot stand it when things are not going my way and when they're out of my control. And the second is that I was running away from family of origin issues. And the third is stress, because at heart, I'm a seeker of truth. And for a while, I believed that the chemical high from drugs helped me access a deeper part of myself. But in the end, I think I just got depleted and I was worn out. So that kind of gives you a little bit of perspective. I used actively for 7 years in my 20s. And thankfully, I didn't have a really low bottom. Because some people, they might use for 20, 30 years. And they'll be drinking and then be adding on other drugs to kind of get a chemical balance that they might need. Because I had some dysfunction in my family, but not nearly the kind that I hear about in some 12-step meetings. Do you guys know people personally who talk about addiction actively right now?
Well, not so much. It's more that we're horrified when we look at the news reports and media that what's going on. For example, last year, I believe in New York City, I think this was in Brooklyn, they reported that some bodega or convenience store had sold people a bad batch of K2, and in the daytime, people were lying on the street. I think about 50 people were lying on the sidewalk, just collapsed. And then there are all these other news reports where there's a shortage of Narcan, and the fact that there's such a need for it, that it's scary. And the other aspect is that for many, many years, there was the misconception that the drug problem or the drug challenge was an urban issue.
Right.
And so that myth has been totally busted. I remember seeing a show on meth about 5 or 6 years ago, and it was showing how prevalent it was in the rural states. It was like Wyoming, Montana, Idaho, Iowa, And now, the news coming out of places like Vermont and Maine, it's really scary. And so our perspective is, one, what's going on that has made it so bad, where it's literally an epidemic on every level. And when we're talking about addiction, Lee, I mean, drugs is just only one form of addiction. When you start looking into addiction issues, there's gambling, there's sex, et cetera, and then video games, and now people are addicted to smartphones. So our perspective is kind of telescoping out a little broader than just the drug thing, and looking at the solution side, like what is the solution side of this thing. And so we are so proud of the work that you are doing, because it's really amazing.
Well, Lee, I don't know anybody that is an addict that talks about it, but I do have a friend who works at a house, with recovering addicts, and she may mention a little thing about her job, but I don't really know someone. There are people I suspect, but who talk about it.
Well, the cool thing about being in recovery and then staying in recovery over time is that you realize that more and more people we don't necessarily always talk about it, but there are 20 million Americans in long-term recovery. So that's 2 years or more, that have abstained from drugs for 2 years or more in the U.S. And the need is about 26 million active addicts right now. So it took me a while to be able to even say, publicly that I had a problem with addiction. And I don't know if people from high school will be listening to this, and it's not necessarily something I'm very comfortable with identifying with, but I think if people like me who are in long-term recovery can give people hope, because...
Right, very important.
If 1 in 3 of us is being affected, 1 in 3 families has someone who is dealing with drug addiction, then more of us need to speak up. That's my.
I think, Lee, the important note there is serious drug addiction. We're not talking about any light thing.
We're talking methamphetamine, heroin, opioids, fentanyl. Yes, absolutely. These things cause overdose and they cause death. Yeah.
And the carafentanil, that is the most mind-boggling thing, because that is used it's an elephant tranquilizer.
But Lee, I agree with you. I think there's such an aspect, it's strange thing about human behavior of shame to so many of the things in our lives. But the healing comes in talking about it. So, that speaks to your courage, because as you said, you don't know if the people in high school are listening to this. And that's part of it, that usually, you're heaped with shame. But wait, you're helping yourself and you're eradicating a problem. So people should be saying, wow, fantastic thing you're doing.
And I think the same goes for almost any medical condition that's associated with some kind of character or morality thing, obesity. We tend to point fingers at people who are addicted to food. Well, it's the exact same thing. It's just manifesting in a different way, and we're all human. So that's part of my spiritual seeking has always been about looking and speaking honestly. And in my family, I couldn't do that because all of the problems were just hidden. They were just, not recognized. And I think my addiction came out because I couldn't be honest, and I couldn't say, hey, this is messed up. I don't like being treated like this.
Wow.
But I'll get a little bit longer, a little bit later. I did want to tell your audience, though, about Addiction Blog. It has 2 million readers now per month, and it's been growing gradually. And for me, it's such a pleasure to watch because I created it to understand what addiction is. So I wasn't satisfied by thinking of it as a disease, because there's the disease model that says, okay, it's a chronic brain relapsing condition, and I can accept part of that. But I wanted to understand, how is it that the drugs are working in the brain? So I broke them down into the 25 different main drugs people take, both illicit and prescription. So everything from Valium, which is handed out for anxiety still for months, years at a time, to the cocaine, the meth, the spice, the heroin, that kind of stuff. And I started writing with the goal of helping others understand the same. So my real mission is to be able to get people into treatment, because I know that treatment works, because it did for me.
That's great, Lee. Thank you for that. What is your vision for Addiction Blog? I know our audience would be curious to know that, because we're really talking about this as a challenging worldwide process and phenomena. How are you positioning your addictionblog.org for the future?
Okay, so I've recently heard a study referenced by Harvard that I haven't found yet, but I will, that addiction is projected to continue to increase until the year 2025, at which point it's going to level off and then perhaps decrease. So we have another 8 years, especially with the opioid epidemic. Opioids, things like oxycodone, hydrocodone, that are being now, legislation is trying to get it under control, but it's out of control. I think Addiction Blog can continue to be a resource for people who are at different stages of change. So they might be like in the pre-contemplative stage, and they're just wondering, what is this drug doing to me? What does it mean to abuse a drug? They might not even be thinking about taking any action yet, but they're starting to ask those questions. And Addiction Blog is perfectly placed because we have 25 articles written on each of those 25 drugs. So if it's about, and it goes by drug, so if it's about meth, it's like, how does meth get you high? If somebody's asking that question, well, we have the answer.
Excellent. Lee, in your view, what is the greatest stumbling block to an addict's recovery? Is it denial or some other issue?
I think every person's challenge is different, so it could be a range of things. Denial is big. So it's a defense mechanism we use to basically ignore a problem so we can continue with a particular behavior. But we get over denial when we accept the facts, which are often mirrored back to us by someone else. But I think that there are 3 more stumbling blocks that are important to mention. The first is shame. We mentioned that earlier. Drug use usually drives people to do things they would not normally do. So you might lie, you might steal, or you might act out sexually. I've done all of those things, and these behaviors can cause us to ruminate and think that we're bad people, but we're not bad. We're just sick. So if we treat drug problems as a medical condition, medical treatment works. Secondly, I think willingness to change can get into the way of recovery. Experts speak about 6 stages of change, from pre-contemplation, when you're becoming aware of a problem, to termination, when you've implemented a change and feel like you're a different person. We're all at a different stage of change when it comes to addiction. And if you're not ready for treatment, you can't force it. And no one around you can force it either. It's not going to work. So to get to that preparation and action stage of change, you need to want to quit using for yourself. So that gets in the way. And then the third is access to treatment. Most inpatient clinics charge around $700 to $800 per day. And outpatient clinics charge about, around $150 a day. So if you don't have insurance, how are you going to get the help? So again, denial is important, shame, willingness to change, and then access to treatment.
I just thought of something, Lee, as I listened to you. I agree with all that, but it occurs to me, does perfectionism play a part in this also? I mean, would it be that feeds the denial in some way?
Oh, I would think so. Being, wanting to get brutally honest requires that you say, I've made a mistake. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yes, right.
So, it's funny because in my own experience, my perfectionism shifted into understanding, oh, goodness, I can ask for help. I don't need to do this all by myself. But, to get there, I had to really fall hard and be like, oh, wow, you're out of control. You can't do this anymore, And thankfully, it was two women friends came to me, and they mirrored that back to me. They said, we don't think you're acting in a way that is, is truly you.
Right.
We hope that you're willing to help. And then I had to say, oh my goodness, they're right.
Yes, because it occurs to me in so many ways, and you said this earlier, we're human, and somehow we're not always accepting and supportive of our and other people's human frailty. That is a part of the human condition. Yeah. Okay, thank you, Lee.
You know, Lee, just segueing back to a question that you asked earlier in terms of personal knowledge, I do know several people who have worked in the addiction field, and one of the things that they always talk about, the point that you made about the person has to be ready for treatment, and so they tend to use a phrase, something like, the tree has to fall all the way down. And I remember I used to always ask, why does it have to fall all the way down, right? You use that term hitting bottom, right? Because it seems at different points, you know, thinking of the Leaning Tower of Pisa, does it need to fall all the way down to people know that it needs support? And that's really what we're talking about.
It totally
no,
doesn't.
it doesn't, right?
You know, if there's somebody out in your audience who can relate, I was a moderate addict. Okay, there are three basic levels of addiction. It's moderate, substantial, and severe.
Okay.
And moderate levels of addiction are characterized when use has begun to affect different areas of your life. And you might get yourself into some dangerous situations when you're using. So that's round about where I fell. I started getting into fights. I was going out late at night in areas I shouldn't have been, you know. I was driving drunk, you know. I'll say that now. Not proud of it, but I did it. And then substantial levels of addiction, then it becomes difficult to stop using. So you might develop a drug dependence, which is a physical chemistry thing related to the brain. Or when drug use affects your ability to take care of your responsibilities. So you might find yourself calling into work often, being sick, or not being able to pick up your kid from daycare and having something else is happening. It gets beyond the level of manageability. And then when it becomes severe, that's when the tree falls down, right? Then you have lost control over drug use. So you might have tried to stop quitting, but you can't. Or you might try to regulate your use by saying, oh, I'm only going to take, 50 milligrams of this, but you end up using 100, Or you might use it more frequently. When it starts to get out of control and it becomes harder to function on a daily basis, then you've got a pretty severe addiction. And I think that they also speak in 12 steps about getting off at a certain level of the elevator as it goes down to hell. That some people exit on the first floor, but some people have to go all the way down. And I've been wondering about that. Like, why do some people exit early and others don't? I'm not sure why.
Right. That's really tough. So, Lee, here's a question that has always been in my mind. In your experience, since you have a wide and deep experience in this area, for a recovering addict, what tends to be the primary trigger for relapse? And, in my mind, I've always looked at environment being a key aspect, that staying away from familiar haunts or friends who were involved with the addiction process. Have you found that to be true in your experience?
Well, I think it's the same as the barriers to treatment. So the triggers for relapse will be different for each person. So, some possible triggers, I was thinking of a few. I think environment has a lot to do with it. But I think that there are three main things. That's craving, stress, and then stinking thinking. They call it stinking thinking. But, drug cravings are real, and they produce strong psychological and even physical desire. I mean, some people who are coming off of cocaine, they feel it in their blood, they say. They need cocaine so badly that their body is screaming for it. And that can be months after withdrawal, So those cravings, they hang around for a while. And this is why medications, which are part of treatment, combined with talk therapy are so important, because you have to figure out how do you manage those cravings, right? They drive people right back. The second is stress. You're more likely to return to old patterns when you don't have another coping mechanism. So stress and anger management, I think, are key to long-term recovery. Because if something happens in those first 12 months, it can just trigger your old pattern. You go right back to it. So you have to learn how to manage your stress. And then the stinking thinking, I think, is the most important thing. Because regardless of environment, we are in our heads. And psychological patterns, they are super hard to change. I'm sure you guys can relate, you know? So if you don't work on it, then your dominant ways of thinking prevail. And I've found a few things to be true of addicts. It's like some addicts are like, oh, poor me. You know, life is so hard. They could start thinking like that. I do that. They might just be like, F it, you know. Why am I depriving myself? Live life for today. Carpe diem. It's another way of thinking. Or you could be like, I just can't take it anymore. You know, this is what I deserve. I'm going to use again. So I think those three with environment, craving, stress, and stinking thinking, I think that they drive people back into relapse.
Thank you for that, Lee. That was certainly a comprehensive answer, and that was the type of thing I know our audience really appreciates your expertise. We'll be back in a moment with our featured guest today, Lee Weber of Addiction Blog, on Learn to Live Stress-Free.
Have you been procrastinating about completing an important project or following a treasured dream? Hi, this is Christine Wright. I specialize in helping my coaching clients to lay out clear, goal-achieving strategies. I show you how to quickly build your confidence and uncover and eliminate your habitual patterns of resistance and self-sabotage. Let me help you discover those meaningful insights that will get you to do what works so you can celebrate your successes. Go to stressfreenow.info/contact to let me know that you're curious about how to live your ideal life now. Again, that's stressfreenow.info/contact. Are you dealing with stress, burnout, chronic pain, anxiety, or unresolved grief? Dr. Robert Wright Jr., the Stress Relief Doctor, is an author, speaker, and stress management wellness coach. Co-host of the Learn to Live Stress-Free podcast series, Dr. Bob holds a Ph.D. in Transformative Studies and a master's degree in psychology. He is the author of the first published study to show the connection between stress reduction, grief recovery, and nitric oxide spiking and the relaxation response. He has a wealth of practical knowledge which helps you to relieve the stresses of everyday life so you can live longer and play with your grandchildren. Work with Dr. Bob and he'll give you the tools you need to dissolve your pain points quickly and effectively. Email him to find out how you can start to feel better at stressfreenow.info/contact. That's stressfreenow.info/contact.
Hi, this is Dr. Bob. Welcome back to Learn to Live Stress-Free with our featured guest today, Lee Weber of Addiction Blog. Lee, before the break, you were talking about the things that really cause people to relapse. I want to thank you so much for identifying the role, especially that stress plays in that, because burnout, especially today, is such a key issue for many people. You know, Christine reminds me often that what we face and what many people face is that we have more things in our day than time to do them. So it can feel that sense of time compression where everything is speeded up. And so it really doesn't take much to, it used to be people would say, well, I feel like I have bricks going into my basket. Now it's like cinder blocks, right, which are a lot heavier than bricks. And so when you're trying to get stuff done and run, and so that can be a big thing.
But Lee, when Bob's talking about the stress, what I identified with what you talked about was the stinking thinking. One of the mailings that I read, that's what the moderator uses all the time. And what you said was very true. It's easy to be inside your own head, and in your head you can make anything true, even if it's not objectively true and realistically true. And I think many people can get trapped in their thoughts and convince themselves of something that when you said your friend said to you, hey, Lee, and that's what people need to be pulled out of their head.
Yeah, I think people in recovery have the same prescription for life, to live a good life as any other people. We all deal with the same things. It's just that the drugs are the manifestation. That's the way that people are coping. Other people cope in other ways. But that prescription for life, in order to prevent any kind of relapse or backtracking, I think you guys would probably agree. Like, I think it's exercise, right? 20 to 30 minutes a day, because that cardio, it moves the blood and the energy. It's so good for chi, you know? I think meditation and prayer, 20 minutes a day. It's a work in progress for me, but I believe in it. And then I think the third is to talk openly about your problems with others. The stress we're talking about, Dr. Bob, is also a manifestation of our thoughts. So if we can have some guidance and understand that the anxiety around even the stress is imagined, I mean, what an opening for us. Talk to a therapist, a confidant, a mentor, a coach like you guys, whoever you trust or look up to. But I think that those three things, so you're addressing your body, you're addressing your spirit, you're addressing your mind, and then the last thing you have to do is just keep working on it, because accepting life on life's terms comes with both faith and periods of doubt,
Absolutely, we agree, and you said it correctly. That's really what we do in our practice as coaches, that most people need to have some system for regulating their life. And that's what Dr. Bob and I do in our practice, is that we see that people have a method for relieving their stress, for increasing their health and their well-being, that on a daily basis, the same way we eat and we sleep, there's something we do to make ourselves feel better, whether it's exercise, meditation, open focus, ideokinesis, that we have some practice of regulating our stress.
Lee, this is a really big question, and so I want to telescope out here, and I don't know that you have the answer or anybody has the answer, but we would like your view. And since addiction is literally a worldwide phenomena, do you see any solutions on the horizon that will increase the chances for a successful long-term recovery for addiction on a global basis?
Well, yeah, I think it's about access to treatment, which boils down to funding. It's crazy. It's almost as if it's a little market, Insurance companies, I think in the U.S., insurance companies need to reimburse addiction treatment as a health condition. They need to be straightforward about it, but to be frank, without laws to back it up, I think companies are going to play out the great drama of unchecked capitalism. And I think that insurance companies are greedy. So, in other words, without patient-centered laws, we as addicts who need help are pretty much screwed. So it's about access to treatment, which requires funding. Recently, I don't know if you guys know about this, but this week, the House of Representatives voted through the American Health Care Act. Well, this act is a huge blow to addiction and its treatment, because it allows states to opt out of something called these quote-unquote essential health benefits, which includes substance use disorders. So in order to address the problem, we need better legislation, and it needs to require states to provide funding for the treatment. That's what I believe. I can't really speak to governments outside of the U.S. because I'm not quite sure of their laws and how they operate. But I think countries can look to the U.S. for best practices. From where I am in Europe, I live in Eastern Europe, Southeastern Europe, in Skopje, Macedonia. And so our world here is kind of informed about European medicine, and it's fairly socialistic, I should say. But we're learning that 12 steps aren't for everyone, because the history of U.S. addiction treatment started by kind of facilitating 12-step attendance. But recently, the evidence has been, okay, 12 steps work for some, they don't work for everybody. So what do? A combination of medication, so prescription-based medications that balance out brain chemistry, plus psychotherapy, they work to treat addiction. So if globally, if other governments, municipalities could look to that addiction treatment model and start implementing it, I think it would be wonderful. And, complementary therapies at the moment that are on clinical trials, they could also be integrated into a holistic package. And I believe in the potential of things like acupuncture, neurofeedback, mindfulness, and yoga therapy, and even animal therapy, like equine therapy, where people work with horses, dogs, cats, animals, doesn't matter, and art therapy. I think that if treatment centers offer the base of psychotherapy with medication-assisted treatment, and then offer these complementary therapies kind of as electives, I think you're going to see a lot more people being able to connect with their inner self, because the work is inside. Does that make sense?
Yes, I just want to add music therapy to that. There are several new studies that show the efficacy of music therapy in terms of addiction.
Thank you. Yes.
So, Lee, Bob stands corrected. You do know the answer, and I think that's
no. This is my opinion.
No, that sounds like a really fantastic model. Now, we would appreciate you sharing, too, what are the support systems that the family of an addict needs in order to increase the chance for successful recovery? And what resources are available to help individuals and family deal with this, in terms of forgiving the addict for what they may have done to themselves or to family members, and just dealing with the spiritual side of addiction recovery?
These are great questions. I'm going to kind of split up my answer into three parts. There are different resources available to families at different stages. So, for example, to get someone into treatment, you've got a ton of resources. You have rehabs, you have interventionists. These are certified people who can help you plan an intervention. You have addiction counselors and licensed psychotherapists who specialize in addiction, even your family doctor, a psychiatrist, or a licensed clinical social workers. It will depend on the situation about who you get in touch with, but those are kind of the short list of people and places you can seek help. But for families who want to invest in real change, I'd recommend something called the CRAFT model. It's CRAFT, and it stands for Community Reinforcement and Family Training. It's basically a 3 to 4 month weekly course that teaches the families the strategies about how to take care of themselves while they're supporting their loved one. So, for example, you're taught how to set boundaries. So you would use positive reinforcement and negative consequences to discourage addiction. Let's say, your daughter's hungover. You might let her make her own breakfast, or avoid caretaking for her in the morning, or emotional connection as she's dealing with her hangover. But then once she's sobered up and she's present and she is not using, then you might make her a nice meal and you would spend time with her, something like that. So you'd learn these strategies through CRAFT so that you would be staying safe around an addict, for one, because it can explode very quickly when somebody is high or somebody is drunk. It can get really violent. So how to stay safe, they teach you how to do that. They teach you how to decrease your stress and focus on the positive aspects of the situation. And then the end goal is to use effective ways to get someone into treatment. So from what I understand, CRAFT is around 70-80% successful around week 6. So once families engaged in this training and they learn how to interact with an addict, then you find the opportunities to start to introduce treatment. So I think that's really helpful. And many people don't know about CRAFT. CRAFT is kind of like an unsung hero, I think, in addiction treatment. It's I think it's very helpful. And then, okay, so that answers that. To support someone who's currently in treatment, then it's a lot more hands-on. So now we're talking family therapy. But that's when you get into the tough stuff. So you open the closet and you bring out the skeletons. You pick up the rug, and you see what's been swept under, or you talk about the elephant.
Oh, my gosh.
And that is deep, and because you get into the dysfunction that's happening within the family unit, But it always, for your audience, family therapy always requires a professional counselor or psychologist, You can find one maybe through a rehab, or you can look for one on your own. So it's better to work with someone who has experience with addiction. And to find somebody, people could visit the APA Find a Therapist directory. So do you know that Find a Therapist from the American Psychological Association? It's a wonderful tool. Yeah, exactly. They have state listings there. But the bigger question that you have, Christine, about forgiving an addict, that's a very personal process. My understanding of forgiveness is that it's a heart-centered feeling. So you know when you've forgiven somebody because you'll think of them without feeling anger, you won't feel contempt, you won't feel disgust. Instead, you'll feel love. How do we forgive? That's a great question.
That's a story that many people look at. What someone had once said to me is that forgiveness is a process over time. And I think with some sort of special intervention, it can happen immediately. But for many people, it is a process over time.
It is, because I think forgiveness is ultimately about killing the ego. We have to kill that separation between us and the other. So it gets really deep, because then we have to say, okay, well, we're all one. But how do you get to that place?
Well, Lee, you said that. What did you speak to Christine before this interview? Because now you mentioned two things about the distinction between self and other and the need to be other, and then you mentioned boundaries. Those are two things that Christine talks about all the time, and as she actually lives there. So to hear you say that as a real solution, where because it's like moving away from the narcissism and super narcissism that we see, and all the new studies are coming out with saying how, especially younger people, the number one thing that they're dealing with is a sense of loneliness and aloneness. Even when they're in a group of people, or they're on Facebook or using social media or texting people in the same room instead of talking to them, many of them report feeling alone and lonely.
But the flip side to that is, like, to feel love, you have to give love. I think that's the hardest lesson to learn, is that you're not the object of someone else's love. You are the engine to be loved, right? So if we're lonely, then the prescription for that is to go out and to be a good friend, That's at least that's what I believe. But all these questions, they're deep-rooted human questions about existence. How do we do that? So I think, for me personally, because I'm working on this, I still have some black specks on my heart. I still hold on to that stuff. I don't know why, but I feel it. So I'm working with a mentor.
One of the things that I have found, Lee, or that when I taught in schools, what I found that many children were missing was a sense of being loved. That not in every case, but my thesis is that if, as an infant, you feel at the center of the universe, and your emotional needs for bonding and attention or love are met, then that as you go through life, not always, it's much easier to feel safe and secure. And having had that, it's easier for you to give it, that you have that strength, because I find many people are missing a sense of self-importance, of confidence, of security, and they tend to put themselves last on the list. And when you do that, you are easy prey for someone to lead you down the wrong path. Because the least little bit of attention that you get, you'll follow anybody when you don't feel that sense of being filled with self-love and confidence, so it's easy for you to give it. You don't need it from someone else. But many people need it from someone else to feel validated. And that's what I have found is when it can get dangerous for you.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, there is that hierarchy of needs that's based on models and theory of development, right?
Yes.
So, I know particularly that the studies that were done with the orphans, and how some children could not even feel, even at 18, 19, 20, there was no empathy. It was impossible to feel empathy. I do think that those parts of ourselves, if they're not used, then they can close. But I guess it's my hope that they're always open, and that even because if it's not a parent, then could somebody, a trusted person, love us enough that we can at least feel what love is and feel secure? I don't know.
It actually can be, because again, with my children, many times, for whatever reason, there weren't always two parents in the home. And many of my children, it was a grandparent or someone else raising them. But when there's that, when someone has that bond that they know someone is looking out for them, then they feel safer taking risks.
Yeah. So what I want to just jump in here and say two things. First of all, I think we've opened the door here to another really deep podcast, because, this thing with the addiction, the underlying causation, this is ocean deep. It's not just a swimming pool. The thing that I want to say, what you're talking about, is I think it's two sides of a coin. That yes, it's important to be loved by someone else and recognized, but the flip side of that is the self-love. George Benson did a song, The Greatest Love of All, and every time I listen to that song, because the lyric says, learning to love yourself is the greatest love of all. And the thing is, when I did my study, one of the things that I focused on at the end was the tragedy of Whitney Houston's life. That, here was a woman that came from a background where not just that she was talented, her mother was talented, her aunt was talented, and her voice was amazing. She was an actress, and she had so many things going for her, including, making money and celebrity, etc. And yet, look at how tragically she died. And so what we're really talking about is the self-image, the love. So when George Benson talks about learning to love yourself, because when you really love yourself, and Christine has said this to me over the years several times, where the person is secure inside. They don't have this need to strike out or be mean or say harsh things, because they feel good about themselves. And so I think it's a two-sided coin when you can surround yourself and are nurtured by people that love and care about you, so that you can say, yes, I was loved. And then you have the flip side, which is that you feel good from the inside out because you do like yourself. Because I'm sure, Lee, you've probably seen people say this. They look in the mirror and they say, I don't like myself. And so I know the first time I heard someone say that, I was really startled, because they were a very successful person and et cetera. But they said, sometimes I look in the mirror and they didn't like what they saw. And that's what we're really talking about, is getting to that place where you like what you see when you look in the mirror.
Yep. And if somebody is starting to use drugs, like if you're just starting on that path, and the drug works really well, because it will resolve all of that. It'll
resolve it.
4 to 8 hours. But in those moments, you don't have self-esteem issues. You are inside your head totally, and you feel great. You feel euphoric. You feel more than great. You feel like a sense of well-being. The real challenge would be for people who are starting down that path to pull back and say, why am I doing this? And what else could I be doing? But I don't know many people, myself personally, who have that kind of self-control, who can stop in the moments where they're starting to see a problem and ask questions.
Well, Lee, we did a podcast with Lily Sloan out of San Francisco, and she made a good point. She asked the question, and she is a marriage family therapist, and she makes a good point. She asked the individual, are you tired of being numbed out just to get through the day? And so that's the caveat I would add to you. When the person is high, they're actually numbed out.
Yeah.
And so thank you so much for being our guest today. And this is a discussion that will have to be continued.
Okay. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. Thank you for being with us today, Lee. And I do have to say, I agree with you. Sometimes that what helps the situation is some extraordinary grace, that something pops into the person's mind or some thought or action, So it is a mystery. And I agree with Bob that this is definitely material for another show. Lee, would you take this time to tell our audience how they can learn more about you and Addiction Blog?
Sure. The best thing to do if you want to get in touch with me is to email me. It's Lee, Lee, at addictionblog.org. I'm a very good communicator on email, so I'll respond to all emails. And then you can check out the blog itself. You can either just, do a Google search for Addiction Blog and we'll show up, or go to addictionblog.org. We have a contact us button there at the bottom. Or if you see a thread that you're interested in, you can add a comment, and then we try to respond to those comments as well. So you can check out, we have infographics, we have videos, and we have mainly articles. Oh, we have ebooks. We have ebooks as well. So just go to the site and explore around.
Okay, very good. Now, your ebooks are on the site, Lee?
That's right, they are. It's addictionblog.org/ebooks.
Okay, fantastic. So, audience, you can email Lee directly at lee@addictionblog.org, and you can just check out addictionblog.org and look at the ebooks, the infographics, and all the material that Lee has there. Thank you so much, Lee.
Lee, what final thoughts or key idea would you like our audience to take away from today's broadcast?
That addiction is it's a medical condition, and that it can be treated. And I think that people should take away hope. And life can get better. It can get much better when you stop using drugs in order to deal with life.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Lee. And I want to thank you for being our featured guest. And audience, I want to thank you, our listeners, for tuning in today, wherever you are, in whatever time zone you're in right now. We're always pleasantly surprised when we see how far away some of our listeners are, besides in the United States, that we have listeners in Japan, Germany, and Australia, and in places like Ghana and South Africa. So we are thrilled to have you listening in. We, again, appreciate your presence and hope that you have benefited in some unique way from the information that we have been able to bring you today. As always, we hope that you will contact us with your feedback and comments. Remember, listeners, if you'd like to experience some of the same benefits our coaching clients get with us, including learning how you can get more results in your day and easy ways to dissolve your chronic pain, stress, and anxiety, then give us a call at 954-900-2179. For Christine Wright, this is Dr. Robert Wright, Jr. of StressFreeNow.info. Until next time, be safe and be well.